Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Today I talk with Chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, Liz Walters, who's also a longtime New Deal leader, currently serving in local office as Vice President of the Summit County Council. Liz first joined An Honorable Profession back in the summer of 2021, but a lot has happened in Ohio over the last 3 years. From the state's high-profile abortion ballot measure passed in 2023 to Donald Trump's recent selection of Ohio Senator JD Vance as his running mate. Liz and I talk about Ohio's transition from voting Obama to Trump, her thoughts on JD Vance as the vice presidential nominee, and how unlikely coalitions are the key to success. Liz tells us what she's seeing and feeling on the ground in Ohio and outlines a three-part strategy for the party heading into November, a strategy that has lessons for Democrats everywhere. I hope you enjoy. Liz Walters, welcome back to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be with you again.
It's so fun to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Before we got on air, we were talking about, just what a crazy summer it's been with back-to-back things. As I mentioned in the intro, you are the chairwoman of the Ohio Democratic Party, in addition to being a fantastic New Deal leader in your own right as an elected official, a county council vice president. But I would love to start today with just talking a little bit about what we are going through and what you're seeing on the ground in Ohio. Tell me a little bit about just what the energy has been since Kamala Harris is going to be our nominee, and how are people feeling?
Listen, people were already, I think, very aware of the stakes of this election. And so when you do a job like this, when you're a party chair and you're talking to county party leaders and activists and, field organizers all the time, I think sometimes maybe we get a little bit more of the energy anyways, because we're so close to it. But there's definitely been a massive uptick in that energy and engagement. And just, it's interesting to put it this way, but I'll say there's been joy and excitement, and people are just so happy to be engaging. And that's like the vibe, right? Those are the vibes. But it's tactically and statistically shifted in a massive way too. And just to give you a sense of this, you hear all those numbers about all the contributions that have come in for Vice President Harris and all those volunteer signups that have come in. In Ohio alone, in the last 7 days, we have had 11,000 new people sign up to take action with us. That's astounding. And it's so energizing and it's so exciting. To be in a place where we actually can't call people fast enough, we can't get through the list fast enough, is awesome. It's a really exciting place to be 100 days out from the election.
That's it does feel exciting. And I love that you use the word joy too, because I kind of feel like there's a difference a little bit about kind of this positive, forward-looking, just just a joyfulness about where we are and kind of what's and contrast that with the other side. But there definitely is going to be, it's a sprint, right? This is such an unusual election with the president, making a really courageous decision, an important decision just to pass the torch. What's your sense of what does anything look different in thinking about this as kind of, being such a shorter election cycle with a new candidate, or is it really just a continuation of the work you guys were already doing?
I think in a lot of ways it's a continuation. I think what we've done is just add more, right? Which is more excitement, more energy, more people. more resources. And, when you're 100 days out, that's great, because the opposite is really tough. If you're not getting enough people, you're not getting enough resources. So I don't know that it changes our path in terms of the tactics we've been using or the work we've been doing. Here in Ohio, we knew coming into this year that we had an assignment. And our assignment was to make sure that, now it's to make sure that Vice President Harris, when she becomes President Harris, has a majority in the Senate and has a majority in the House. Mm-hmm. And there's no way to do that unless here in Ohio, we succeed at reelecting the best, I'm biased, but the best Senator, Sherrod Brown, and sending our frontline members, Amelia Sykes, Greg Landsman, and Marcy Kaptur, back to Congress. So we know we have that assignment, and that's not changing for us. And we're hopeful that the vice president will be here in Ohio when her schedule permits. But we also know that she's got a map she's got to win with. And we support that, because the most important thing is winning. That's the most important thing. And whatever the path looks like, we're rooting for her. And we're going to do whatever we need to do to help with that. And we're going to do our job, which is to make sure that we have a governing majority at the federal level in January of next year.
Yeah. Before I leave kind of the presidential election campaign, obviously JD Vance is an Ohioan. Or you tell me. But anyway, you may have more knowledge and expertise on this person than other people do. It's been a fascinating rollout with him, obviously. What is the take of people on the ground in thinking about him as on the national ticket?
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but think about Governor Beshear's comments. He ain't from here. Unfortunately, we can't say that. He is from here, and though we are loath to claim him, at least on the Democratic side. But look, I mean, I think the hard truth here, both for Ohioans and for voters across the country to realize, is I don't really have a lot to tell you. Because he's been in the U.S. Senate for a sum total of 18 months and has done absolutely nothing except for audition to be Donald Trump's running mate. And I will tell you that the voters in Ohio definitely have buyer's remorse. We have seen no activity, no work at a time when Ohioans are struggling with rising costs, when they have more expensive medication costs than ever, when we want to put new good paying jobs and manufacturing back on the table for Ohioans. He's been absent from those conversations, and he's definitely been absent from that work. So I don't really know why anybody would want to vote for him because he's done nothing and he has no record by which to really recommend him for vice president, and definitely not for another term in the Senate should he make it that long. I think in as the year progresses, we're already seeing it. I mean, talk about somebody who did a real belly flop into the national political waters of just one of the worst launches, and weirder by the day, and kind of seeing what we've known in Ohio for a long time, which is that the less we get to know him, or the more we get to know him, the less we like him. So.
Let's talk about, it has been weird, by the way. I mean, I can't believe we're still talking about, just the divisiveness and, talking about, whether or not people should be or better if they're having kids. Just so much of this has just been something I've never seen before. But I would love to talk about Ohio, though, because Ohio is such an interesting state, right? I mean, you guys were an Obama state, and then you were a Trump state. For a long time, you kind of alluded to this in your comments about the path forward for the presidential candidate. But do you feel like, so what do you think is that for a long time, Ohio was seen as a swing state, right? And that, it was up for grabs, and you obviously have, Senate, Democratic senator and other things. So tell me, like, what do you feel like on the ground is kind of shifted in turning Ohio in the last, decade or so red? Yeah.
So I'm going to start by kind of giving people some food to think on, or some food for thought when they think about politics nationally and the entire map, which is, we do ourselves a disservice as a party when we put states into only two buckets, red or blue. The truth is that in every state, the dynamics are far more nuanced than that. And every state is 1 to 3 cycles away from being something very different. And it's all about knowing the data, understanding the path, and having the resources you need to do the appropriate investment to build power within any given state. Here in Ohio, we've had to be really brutally honest with ourselves about why that has been difficult. And if you want to know how the laws have been passed in Texas and Florida and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi about voter suppression, go back to Ohio about 10 years ago, where you saw ALEC take all these policies out for a test drive in our state legislature and pass them. And so there's been no one big thing, right, that has changed our electorate. It has been death by 1,000 paper cuts. Of every 2 years, there is another voting package or lack of voting package, as we like to say, where we are making tweaks to the registration process, where we are making tweaks to how we vote. The big piece I remind folks of was Obama did win this state twice, as you noted, and 2012 was the last year when Ohio had same-day voter registration, where you could register to vote and vote on the same day. And the Republican legislature took that away after that election was over. And it's really kind of been downhill from there. On top of all of that, our current Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, and our previous Secretary of State, John Husted, who's now the Lieutenant Governor, have collectively purged 2.5 million voters from the rolls in Ohio in the last 10 years. You heard me right, 2.5 million. And it won't surprise anybody to know that a majority of those voters, an outsized majority of those voters, are young people and people of color. And so as we look ahead in Ohio, what we know for sure is that this isn't a singular fight. We're not going to win this with one candidate, right, or in one cycle. It is smart strategic work over time to do both real structural democracy reforms, but also pick smart fights and make gains where we can. So whether that is, in 2021, we had one of the best municipal cycles in the country where we beat all but 5 extreme Republican school board candidates across the state in over 432 school districts, right? We were super proud of that. Or in 2023, right? If you would have told me at the January 23 that I would be sitting here telling you that in 2023, we won ballot measures on democracy, abortion, and weed by double digits, I don't know that I would have believed you, but boy, was that exciting, right? And I think it really shows us that when the issues are clear and when the elections are as fair as we can make them in the current environment, we can win. But we have to be really deliberate and strategic about what that path to victory looks like. And part of that's on us, right? We got lost in the wilderness a little bit. We were competing for an old version of the state that no longer existed. And so we've had to take the time to make really intentional investments in a new map of how do we, one, do the one thing, which is mobilize our base. It's the most important thing that the Democratic Party can do. If we don't do that, nothing else really matters. That means turning out voters in what we call our big 6. So Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Akron, Dayton, and Toledo, and especially young people and voters of color in those communities. Number 2, we've got to fight for and win suburban battlegrounds. We had been not investing in those spaces until about 3 years ago, and we've been making massive gains in those communities. And if you look at our issue map from 23, that's really where some of the magic came from, right? Was flipping some of those counties. And then number 3, and I know this sounds super technical, but we can't get our ass kicked in rural Ohio. You just can't. We're not going to win it, but we got to do 2 to 3 points better across the board. And doing any one of those things is hard. Doing all 3 of them at once is definitely challenging, but it's doable when we are disciplined and we're smart about how we invest our resources and staff our organizations.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with that strategy. In particular, I think it's important that we talk about the third thing that you said, which is to minimize losses and to just make the outreach to just show up, right? We hear a lot of people just saying it's just partly just got to show up to some of these rural areas so they don't feel left behind or don't feel unappreciated or taken for granted. So tell me a little bit more about that piece of your strategy. Yeah. What does that look like?
Well, and I think the other thing that people take for granted, or maybe not take for granted, but misunderstand about rural voters is we place them in this separate bucket where there's supposed to be some magical different set of issues that they care about. And the reality is that most voters are all talking about the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I look at 23 where, we made a huge commitment to the abortion rights ballot measure. And we were the single largest volunteer operation on the ground for that measure from start to finish. And we're very proud of that. And we did that while also protecting 7 incumbent or winning challenger races in rural communities for mayor. And there was a lot of people who were like, you can't win rural mayor's races and talk about abortion. guess what? Rural Ohioans care about abortion access too.
Wow.
So I think that's the first thing I would tell people is that there's not some disconnect between an urban set of issues and a rural set of issues. Are there nuances in how we talk about those things in our different communities? Sure, as there should be. And we should be using, the appropriate messengers and validators who are of that community to speak to those voters. So that's number one. But number two, to your point, is showing up and really helping, particularly, I come at this from a lens of I work with activists and county parties a lot, of helping them understand what is winning, right?
Mm.
Of not setting unrealistic goals for county organizations or for local candidates to be like, you got to get in there and win it all. It's like, listen, let's get 4 points this cycle. 4 points, that's a huge deal. Can we get 4 points? And from 2021 to 2022, right, we improved performance about 7 points average across rural Ohio in that 2022 Senate race where JD Vance unfortunately did win. But in some counties, it was a 10-point gain. And frankly, most of that's because we just showed up, right? And we had staff on the ground, or we invested in reorganizing a county party, or we recruited candidates to run for office. We believe like no race left uncontested. Our job is to try to run somebody in every seat in every community because voters deserve to have choices. And so there's like a bunch of those things that you put together that over time do make a difference, but also really helping our local leaders and our local candidates understand what does victory here look like.
Yeah.
And in some cases, that's, let's lose by 20 instead of 30, Yeah,
but it's important. I mean, I think it's super important. What you're talking about is that the issue set doesn't change. Getting out there, talking to them, the way you talk about it, maybe the local application of something, right, or the nuance. But you're talking about kind of picking your battles. I think you guys are the one state this cycle that has also a Supreme Court up for.
Yes, I love it.
Could flip, right? Which is state and local people like to pay attention to these things. Tell me about that. That's because that goes to a lot of what you were talking about earlier, right? The democracy piece. If you have a Supreme Court that's not going to be on the side of democracy and all those things, and you really are up against the wall. So what does that look like? So
in Ohio, we elect our Supreme Court. Up until 2022, those races were nonpartisan. And at the time, the makeup of the court is right now 4-3, 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans. In 2022, and probably it's so hard to keep track of all the crazy things our state Republicans do because, in some ways, I got to give it to them. They're shameless. They have no shame about the ways they manipulate democracy to kind of enshrine their power. But in 2022, they put an amendment in the budget, which means we can't challenge it when it's in the budget, to put partisanship on the Supreme Court races. Only the Supreme Court and appellate court, but not county and local. So we have kind of 2 different sets of judicial races now in Ohio. And it was a shameless move because they thought that if they put partisanship on the ticket, it would change it. So going into 2024, we have 2 incumbents on the court that we are protecting, Justice Mike Donnelly and Justice Melody Stewart. Justice Stewart is the first African-American woman elected to the Supreme Court. We want to make her the first African-American woman reelected to the Supreme Court. And then we have a 3rd open seat that we are running a challenger in. It's an appellate court judge from Cleveland, a woman named Lisa Forbes, who's awesome. So these 3 are our opportunity. Lisa represents the flip opportunity that would change the court from 3-4 to 4-3. I could talk for hours about the insanity of this, so I'll try to condense it into a couple key points. Yeah. One, why these races matter is that there are going to be so many critical issues that Ohioans care about before the court in the next year to 18 months. And that includes our abortion rights amendment that we put on the ballot and passed by 13 points, like 57 to whatever, in 2023. Our Republican Attorney General, Dave Yost, has made it very clear that he plans to use a judicial strategy to try to challenge that and to reinstate a 6-week ban alongside that amendment. Mm-hmm. And so who's going to decide on that is going to be the people we elect this November to the court. And that is what we were finding to be the number one issue for most voters. But they're also going to be hearing really important cases on marijuana implementation, which Ohioans overwhelmingly supported, on workman's comp benefits, on voting rights, on redistricting, which we'll have a redistricting reform on the ballot this November in Ohio too. And whoever's on the court will implement whatever that law looks like. And so it's really critical for us to have both a fair court and a balanced court, but also a court that is responsive to the voters of Ohio, which we don't currently have. And I'll wrap it up by saying, to give you a little snapshot of the court we do have right now, which includes Mike DeWine's son, Pat DeWine. He appointed his own son to the court.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's about as gross as you would think, because he does not recuse himself from cases involving his father, which is just the worst. And if there's one thing Ohioans hate more than anything, it is corruption and nepotism, and we have that in spades on the court. The last opening, which was last year for an appointment, Governor DeWine appointed his son Pat's best friend, the Hamilton County prosecutor, who's never been a judge, to the Ohio Supreme Court. And they did that appointment on the condition that he would not run for his own seat, but instead would run against the Black woman. And so that is who is running against Melody Stewart, our incumbent justice, which is one of her now colleagues on the court, a guy named Joe Dieter, so who got run out of the state treasurer's office on corruption charges about 20 years ago, by the way. So it's a real cast of characters here. Yeah. And in case you missed it, we did make a little bit of national news last week because the 4-3 Republican majority made a. I can't even talk about it without laughing, but I shouldn't laugh because it's serious. They made a ruling about a boneless chicken wing case. I don't know if you saw this.
I did see that. Yes.
It is actually not reasonable for people to expect that boneless chicken wings should be boneless.
I don't understand why that's what we're talking about, but
I know
that's the craziest thing.
It's also as our Democratic Justice Mike Donnelly wrote in the dissent, he's like, this is actually a pretty big issue because it begs the question, well, like what does truth in labeling mean then?
Right.
What should we expect if something is called one thing, but then it gives us another? And by the way, does this grievous bodily harm? Because this suit was initiated by a guy who swallowed the chicken wing. It perforated his
oh my gosh,
something in his stomach, and he went septic and got very, very sick from it. And so he did not end up getting any relief from the court. So
oh my gosh,
it is interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, well, it's a totally fair point about the just truth. What does truth mean, right? What can you say something is or isn't? I want to go back to the initiative to issue one that you guys were able to be successful on last year in November. I mean, we've got a lot of other, which for people, I'm sure most of our listeners probably know, but this was enshrined abortion rights in the Ohio Constitution, which is a huge deal, obviously. And to your point, 13 points. I think that probably, you tell me, but that surprised a lot of people outside Ohio. Sounds like your reaction maybe even surprised you guys a little bit. There's a ton of states that are, including places like Florida and maybe Arizona, they're going to have ballot initiatives. This time, I'm just wondering if there are lessons you learned from that coalition that came together, what you saw that other people might be able to take from your experience.
Yeah, I think kind of putting on my party hat, like I have my party hat on, but like really coming at this as a party leader. The number one thing I would tell people, which can be hard for us party folks to do or for our candidates to do, is like, we can't center ourselves on the message. These races aren't about us. And while our party is the party of choice, and we should say that, the actual ballot measure is not a Democratic ballot measure. It is party neutral. And so if we are too party forward in the messaging, we could end up turning off people who could be a critical part of a winning coalition for us at the ballot. And that is so antithetical to what candidates know to do, what party leaders often know to do. And so it can be challenging. Now, in the home stretch, right, up until October, we really kept our powder dry. But then from October on, it's like bombs away, because it's time to get everybody out to vote. And so we're going to talk to very specific parts of the electorate through media that we know we can reach. So I think that was number one. I think for those folks who are working in coalition states, like, the thing about ballot measures, and this is party life, party politics has its own challenges to be sure. And the Democratic Party, the big D Democratic Party, is its own very unique and diverse coalition. But anybody who's worked on a ballot measure or an issue campaign will tell you that like coalition politics is a whole other ballgame. And so really finding, having the patience and the willingness to get into coalition with partners who you sometimes don't work with, and frankly, you may never work with again. That's okay. Like it is okay to be in partnership and be in alignment on one thing and do everything you can to make that work, and then be not in alignment on other things and just be okay with that. And that's also not like, it's kind of, we've always in politics, it's kind of like trench warfare mentality. You're either for us or against us, and there's no middle ground. And so I think for us, it was really opening ourselves up to working in partnership with new folks. And really what we found was, we grew the table. It's, and what a blessing, right? What a great opportunity to say, actually we need more chairs for the table. Like that's a great thing. And we should never say no to that, even if it comes with its own set of challenges. But I also think that like for abortion, this is what makes it unique is like people kind of already know how they think about it, right? This actually isn't in Ohio, at least it wasn't. I can't I don't know the language that they're running in the other states, but our language was pretty clear. It was very deliberate. And we kind of had to go on with the reality, like people know how they feel about this. And so we're turning them out and we're helping them understand that our language fits within how they feel about this. We are not doing anything crazy. The Republican talking points of like abortion up until birth, it's not true. That's not real. That's actually not a medical thing in this country. And so as much as we wanted to make this about, sometimes you want to make this like really high feeling and really persuasive. It's like, actually, it's a pretty logical argument, right? And it's really about truth telling, storytelling of people whose lives have been deeply impacted by lack of access or would be impacted by lack of access, and kind of debunking myths. There's not a lot of people that like are coming out for the first time to be like, so tell me about this issue. I'm not sure I understand, right? Like minds are pretty much made up.
Yeah, no, I think you said so much important stuff there. I on the mischaracterization piece though, that is so true. And it's not even just up until birth. Now it's like past birth, which I can't, right? I mean, Trump literally said that on the debate stage. It's like, that is murder. What are you talking about? No one wants to kill humans. Children. This is crazy. Children. So anyway, I just find the whole thing to be frustrating that we have to go back and have what are, just completely erroneous. And I mean, worse, like just terrible lies being told. So anyway, that I think that's one thing. But the thing that you talked about with growing the table and finding more seats, I love that analogy. It's like, I think that's kind of what we have to do on everything, isn't it? I mean, really in this election, I think it's such a smart and thoughtful response. And I mean, to be clear, if we're going to win in November, if Democrats are going to win in November, then, we're going to have to put a coalition together that welcomes people who are Republicans, but are never Trumpers, who are independents and don't agree with us on some things. And this kind of, I've been doing this 30 years. You've been doing this a long time. This kind of shift that we've had over the, years to be like you're either with me or against me on, and on one thing, it means everything, right? Instead of saying like, look, let's make a coalition around this, let's save the child tax credit, right? And there's lots of people who want to do that. And I don't care if you have a D or R next to your name. I just find it to be super important to have that conversation. And I'm sure, particularly in states where there's a pretty broad cross section of people, of party registration and people. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think in Ohio, we had it was such a compacted timeline. I'm sure some of your listeners followed too, that in the lead up to November, we actually had a unconstitutional special election in August. So in January of 23, Governor DeWine signed a bill banning August specials. LOL, just kidding. And then when the Republicans saw that we were that this abortion issue was taken off and it was gonna qualify and it was gonna get to the ballot, they passed a constitutional amendment through the legislature that they put on an August special that would change the win threshold for ballot measures from 50% plus one to 60% in Ohio.
Yeah.
And, in Ohio, we've had the right to a ballot measure through what we call citizen-led ballot measures, because it is not easy to make the ballot in Ohio. You have to get hundreds of thousands of signatures. You have to qualify in 44 of 88 counties. It's a lot of work, and usually on a very compacted timeline. And the Republicans are like, well, that may be hard, but we're about to up the ante because we just don't like your issue. And Ohioans we've been judicious, right? Over the course of the 100+ years we've had this, we've only amended our own constitution, I think 13 times. Out of the 90+ ballot measures we've had on the ballot. And it was a really great example of where we built one coalition for that campaign. And then when we moved on to the fall, some of those coalition partners fell off because they're like, we're rooting for you, but this isn't just not in line with our organizational mission or with our membership. And so a great example was that in August, our building trade unions were all in because the building trades, all of our labor movement knows how important the ballot measure is in Ohio because it's how we've beaten back right to work in our state within the last couple of decades at the ballot box. But when it came to November, they're like, we're not against your issue, but this just isn't something this isn't what our members want us. We're here to fight for wages and workplace. And we're like, cool, well, thanks for helping out in August. We're going to go carry this over the finish line. Right. And it worked. Right. And we're all we found different ways to work together. So
yeah, no, that's so helpful. I think people listening will appreciate your insights having gone through that. I want to spend just a minute or two talking about you a little bit and your path into this job. I know that you were the executive director of the party at one point in your career, and now you are chair. I'm curious kind of about what that experience allows you to bring to a chair, maybe that other people didn't bring to the chair, and kind of how that's impacted the way you think about your role.
Yeah, I love that question. So I am like a lot of other folks that are in this work. I came through this through organizing as a community organizer. That's how I started. I came into politics. I don't come from a political family. I come from a single parent household, but I lived with my grandparents. My mom and I lived with my grandparents. So it was multi-generational. And like a lot of people who come into political action, I got into this because my mom declared bankruptcy for medical costs when my grandfather was at the end of life, and we hit the Medicare donut hole. And it was just one of those moments. I was 21. I was a history major, and I was like, this can't be how this is supposed to work. And sure enough, after multiple, when Google was really first becoming a thing of trying to figure out, did we forget to sign a form? Did we forget to check a box? Nope. This is what happens to a lot of working class people. My mom was a nurse, right? And for my whole life, we lived paycheck to paycheck. And I never really understood what that meant until the catastrophic happened. And as my family and I went on this journey, you really quickly figure out that there's just so many people that live in this experience. And it wasn't a straight path into politics, but it was kind of this is when I got curious about it, and eventually ended up on a path where I really connected with this little known senator from Illinois named Barack Obama, who told these powerful stories about his mother at the end of her life and her struggles with the insurance company. I was like, this guy gets it. If he ever does this, I'm all in. And that's kind of how it started, right? And it started me on a path, and I loved the work, and ended up, worked for the labor movement, worked for my hometown member of Congress, went to work for the party, which is how I got to know Senator Brown, was his political director on his 2012 reelect. And then wanted to come back home. My mom had gotten ill, and I moved back home and ran for local office. And I did not think I was going to go back into party life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when my predecessor stepped down at the end of 2020, a couple of labor leaders I really respect and the senator encouraged me to run for party chair. And a fun thing about Senator Brown is when he encourages you to do something, he then hangs up the phone and starts telling people that you're doing it. And so you're like, okay, I guess
Wait a minute.
But I think in that sense, there's two pieces here, a couple pieces that have been really unique for me. One, and this is maybe a hot take that some listeners won't agree with, because I think a lot of people that listen to this are electeds, and they're all going to have very different opinions and relationships with their county parties and their state parties. But state parties are really important. they matter a great deal to the political ecosystem for good or bad, whether you think your state party doesn't do anything or you think it's the best in the world. Like most of us are set forth in state code. We're not going anywhere, right? Number one. And number two, we are the only entity in American politics that can legally mix federal and non-federal funds to run program. And so we matter a great deal for that alone. But three, we're the only realistic entity that can maintain some kind of critical level of infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean things like assets and resources like voter data, volunteer activism, digital audience building. Like some of this stuff really only works well when you're doing it all the time. You're not just doing it in these 6-month sprints in the lead up to a candidate election every other year. And so I think that matters a lot. So I think when I came into the party, I had a little bit more, I had a lot more, frankly, expertise on the financials and the structures of the state party that a lot of new chairs don't have because this is their first time getting exposed to it. So it's never without its challenges, but I think I was able to just kind of like get the training wheels off a bit faster. And that was important because we had a lot of work to do. We had a lot of debt to retire. We had a lot of relationships to rebuild. We had a lot of county parties to reorganize. And so being able to do the work at a faster pace helped us go a lot farther in a shorter amount of time. But I also think coming from both an organizing background and being a local elected official, I have the ability to kind of put on different goggles to say, to a national operative, like, I understand why you want to do that. Here's why this isn't going to go how you think it's going to go. And like, let me walk you through what this actually looks like when you're on the ground with this activist group in this community. Or let me walk you through why, for either legal or political reasons, local electeds are going to hate this. And so like, let's find a different way to accomplish your goal. And that's like a 50-50 proposition. So sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't, but you always want to be there to give counsel and help people succeed. So
yeah, I love that. And how do you, I'll kind of end on this. I mean, you mentioned your work, and that's how we're connected. You are a NewDEAL leader in your capacity as a local elected official. You're doing great work. I mean, being the champion for parental leave in your county and doing great work on sustainability. How do you find time to do all this? How do you juggle everything? How do you balance it?
I have a really great staff. I will say that. I think one of the most important things that we have done at the state party in the last 3 years is really make it a place where not only where people can work, but where they want to come work. We invest a lot in staff development, and it's great, but it's bad because I keep getting a lot of staff, people come and poach them. So many of my staff, like one now works for Senator Ossoff, one's at the DNC, and I'm happy for them, sad for me. But it helps you build this kind of culture of learning and excellence and the pursuit of good, like doing good work. And we have a really great culture. And I think that's helped a lot because it helps me be able to let go of some things with senior staff. We have really talented senior operatives. I'm like, you got this. I will check in, but you don't need me in these meetings every day. So that helps a lot. And the other thing is just like, I think for the reality of Ohio. So I live in Akron, which is about 2 hours from Columbus, which is the state capital. And I think I started this job during COVID, during stay at home. So number one, I got very spoiled I'm like, this isn't that bad. I don't have to be on the road at all. But once we came out of stay at home, you really, in a state the size of Ohio, right? There's no way around it. You are on the road all the time. And so the team we've gotten really strategic about how to use my time. So I'm not, up and down the I-71 6 times a week. It's like, okay, this week we're doing Southwest Ohio and then a DC day trip, or this week we're doing Cleveland and Youngstown. So it really helps manage the time on a finite schedule. So that's really been what helps quite a bit. And I have 10 great colleagues on county council too. So they are also really able to help pitch in and take over some portfolio stuff that I, as much as I wanted to keep all of it, I'm like, this isn't going to get the attention it needs if I don't turn it over to somebody. So
yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the work you're doing in both places. Hugely important. Very excited to maybe see you in Chicago soon. And we'll be looking forward to checking in and seeing how things are going on the ground there in Ohio. But thanks for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Debbie, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at NewDEAL for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.